Safety is just one part of the food chain. The other is the availability of food in the first place. Joining me to discuss both of these critical issues is Susan Shifflett. She's a former Beijing resident and now works at the Wilson Center's China Environment Forum. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, we mentioned the fact that China is stepping up enforcement and penalties for people violating food safety laws. So why do violations still exist, and how do people in China learn about recalls? Do they have to visit a particular website, or do they really just have to rely on the news?
Well, I think it's really difficult. I mean, China is certainly not alone. Every country faces this issue, and it's particularly amplified in China because you have over 80% of the producers have less than 10 employees. So you're talking about a lot of small different producers. In 2014 alone, there were 560,000 complaints launched in terms of food safety. So how does the State Food and Drug Administration try to run after over 500,000 complaints? It's just a very difficult task to do.
Just a moment ago, we showed you a list of some of the most recent food recalls in the United States. And you know, the United States, it's a developed country. Maybe people may not expect that. Why is it so hard to get food safety right?
Well, I think as you showed earlier, so for instance, there's everything from the powdered donuts at Walgreens that were recently recalled for supposedly having mold on it. And then earlier, I think it was also broadcast to the viewers in India, Nestle's having to recall Maggi noodles, which is going to cost them, they think, maybe $45 million. And so, I mean, the big problem is there's two different problems. One is that the food supply chain has become so globalized. So for instance, your codfish dinner in the US that you might be having for dinner, maybe it was caught in Canada and then sent to China to be processed and then sent to the United States. So I think that's one of the issues. And then the second issue is, whether good or bad, that's, definitely a personal opinion, but there's big food companies, they have thousands of suppliers that are feeding into, or thousands of producers feeding into suppliers. And so they might be able to audit their suppliers, but it's very difficult for them to get down to the farmers.
So you have a lot of people touching what happens and a lot of miles to travel. In terms of the availability of food, the actual food supply, we put together a graphic. I'd like you to take a look at it. It shows the global food supply of two key staples, rice and wheat, by the year 2022. And as you can see here, China will produce a quarter of all the rice and nearly 1/5 of all the wheat. So China's role clearly important here. How does China fit into the global food supply chain?
So a challenge for China is that given its population, roughly a quarter of the world's population, in terms of its amount of natural resources, is a very small pie. So you have roughly 20% of the world's population, but only roughly 10% of the world's arable land and 6% of the world's fresh water. And then to exacerbate that, that water and the land are increasingly contaminated. So in terms of the land and water that you need in order to produce food is very small for the population. So China, one of the things it's done is the government is really pushing forward modernizing the agriculture system. So currently, the country is in a big transition, moving from the smallholder farms into these larger sort of farms. And I think secondly, what the government is also increasingly realizing is that they will have to turn to trade as well. Actually, last week I was in Oakland, California at the port. And one of the things that the port is doing is they're ramping up their cold storage capacity in anticipation of more agricultural exports, both from California, Central Valley, but also from the Midwest to be exported to China.
That being said, when you have a country that is in the middle of industrializing, development replaces farmland. So how critical is it that farmland is maintained once you have it?
It's very important. And I think what you're seeing is that in terms of the contaminated soil, recently there's been in the news that some localities have found 10% of their rice was laced with cadmium due to the soil that it was grown in. And soil remediation, which is the process of getting soil back into shape where it can be at a state where it can be producing crops, is a very difficult process, and it takes a lot of time. So in terms of preserving the land and making sure that it's at a state that it can be continually growing crops is a very important matter for sure.
All right, Susan Shifflett, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you.